The Assassin's Dilemma, An Assassin Without a Name Prequel by Scott Marlowe. I want to hire you to kill my wife. The request was not unusual, nor was it the first time I'd heard it. The reason for such a deed often varied, though it all too often came down to either money or jealousy. My prospective client, Mr. Roland Fairwind, was beyond wealthy, a self-made success story tied intimately with Alchester's burgeoning airship industry. As such, he commanded a vast shipbuilding empire with hundreds of employees and a network of business partners and associates that stretched across most of the four fiefdoms. A man like Mr. Fairwind didn't want or need his wife dead because of money. But jealousy? I didn't know him well enough to say. And while it wasn't my place to know my client's reasons, most told me anyway out of some perverted need for justification. So I stood in silence and waited for him to enlighten me. "You should know that I do not ask this lightly," Mr. Fairwind said from behind his desk, "but the situation has simply become untenable." He took a quick drag from his cigar, leaned back in his chair, and blew smoke toward the low ceiling. We occupied a small private meeting room, so even when directed away from me, the odorous swirls of vapor soon found and assaulted me. The smoke I could tolerate, but before its odor had even dissipated, Mr. Fairwind insulted my sensibilities by drinking his wine with a cringe-inducing slurp. The vintage was a rare 72, a year of plenty after our fiefdom had experienced years of drought and the associated hard times that came with such a thing. Back then, wine critics had extolled the Burgundy as evolutionary and the brightest spot in the wine industry in over a decade. The wine was exquisite. I'd give the vintner that. But evolutionary? The 72 Burgundy, which Roland had graciously served me so I could sample his finest vintage, as he'd put it, paled in comparison to a 64 Zalara with its rich, spicy flavor, or a 75 Rynar, which was dry and crisp and very unlike the 72. Still, the wine marked Mr. Fairwind as a man of means, if not one with the right connections to secure what was, all other things aside, a very expensive vintage. But Mr. Fairwind's brusque approach to imbuing the delicacy was a clear sign of disrespect toward the finer aspects of wine consumption. If such was a criterion for becoming a client of mine, then I would have already walked out. Instead, I took a small sip from my glass, enjoyed the delicate swirl lighting my taste buds, and waited for Mr. Fairwind to continue. "My wife has made a damn mockery of everything I have built," he said. "Where was she when I conceived the idea for my empire? Where was she when I toiled alongside the men in the shipyards?" Roland slammed an open palm down hard on the surface of his desk. "Where was she when I risked everything on an effort many thought so hopeless that I was the only one brave enough to roll the dice, so to speak, and put forth the effort required to win those early contracts so crucial to my enterprise? The venture was a damn hopeless effort," many told me. A damn hopeless. Mr. Fairwind looked to the room's darkest corner. "Grom, what do you call that?" Roland's steward slithered from the shadows. "Call what, Mr. Fairwind?" "A damn hopeless effort," Roland huffed. "Pay attention, Grom." Before Mr. Fairwind's greasy-haired steward could respond, I said simply, "A forlorn hope." Roland shot up. "That's it. A forlorn hope. You could learn a thing or two about paying attention from this man, Grom. Why, Mr. Whatever am I to call you anyway? If we're to do business, I must call you something." What he called me didn't matter, so I wanted to shrug my shoulders. I almost did. But he fixed me with such an intense stare while waiting for my answer that I felt compelled to make one up on the spot. Russell Tollwood. The name was as good as any other. Certainly not my real one. I never gave that out, and besides, I hadn't used it in some years anyway. For now, for this job, Tollwood would do just fine. "Mr. Tollwood," Roland said, placing his cigar between his teeth. He sucked on it, blew out more smoke, then leaned back in his chair. "My wife has simply gone too far," he sneered. "Rumor has it she may have earned the attention of the king. Preposterous. How does someone of such menial skill earn such accolades? Because of my profession, I did everything possible to avoid the king's attention, but Mr. Fairwind, and by extension his wife, were favored members of Alchester's well-to-do, so I failed to see the detrimental aspect of earning the king's interest. Glancing from Mr. Fairwind to Grom, I hoped one of them might provide the missing context. Noticing my confusion, Grom obliged me. Mrs. Fairwind is an artist. Roland cackled. More like a hack. Grom went on, unperturbed. More specifically, she is a painter. Her work has garnered the attention of the city's most esteemed artisans and even certain members of the city's gentry. As he spoke, I thought I detected the slightest hint of pride in the man's otherwise dour monotone. Their collective praise has reached King Classus's ear, and speculation abounds that he may ask Mrs. Fairwind to host a private showing for himself and the royal family. Pfft, Roland said, scowling. I still didn't understand, and though not relevant to the job, curiosity got the better of me. So I asked, surely this is a good thing. Grom looked like he was about to answer, but his gaze went to his master and, seeing the disapproving scowl still writ across the other's face, thought better of it and remained quiet. Roland, who took another puff of his cigar, appeared even less likely to enlighten me, so I gave up that line of questioning, returning the subject to the task at hand and the reason for my late-night visit. What details can you provide about the job? I asked. I need to know the time frame and any specifics about how you'd like it done. Most clients cared more about the when and less about the how, even going so far as to tell me they wanted to know as little as possible about how I ended the Mark's life. Knowing the person was dead was often enough. This proved the case with Mr. Fairwind, who said, I don't give a damn how it's done. Only that you do it soon. I leave for business outside the city in the morning and will return in 3 days. When I get back, I wish to know she is gone from my life for good, and that I'll never have to gaze upon that loathsome woman's face again. That's a tight timeline, I said. If done right, killing someone only takes seconds. But the planning leading up to that moment was often extensive. 3 days wasn't out of the question, but I felt it necessary to set expectations. Roland forged ahead, nonplussed. 3 days should be more than sufficient. You come highly regarded, Mr. Tollwood. Surely ending the life of one defenseless woman will provide little challenge for you. In my experience, arguing with men like Mr. Fairwind, who had their every desire fulfilled with a snap of their fingers, did little good. Murder was no exception. 3 days it is? Very good, Mr. Fairwind said, standing. As I said, I do not need to know the details, but however you do it, ensure no one finds her body. The last thing I need when I return is having to waste time planning a funeral. People can think she fled the city in my absence for all I care. Better to suffer a brief period of humiliation than to live with that woman any longer than necessary. Of course, there must be no way for anyone to tie this back to me. That goes without saying, Mr. Fairwind, I said. Discretion is one of my most sacred guarantees. He nodded appreciatively at that. As for opportunity, he said, I understand Mara has a gathering of some sort scheduled for tomorrow evening. Isn't that right, Grom? Correct, sir. She is playing host to a few people interested in her work at the Red Tea Room. As I'm sure you recall, you gave her your approval to go ahead with the event. Roland humphed. My permission was not without purpose. Far be it from me to dictate your business to you, Mr. Tollwood. But that seems the perfect opportunity to do the deed. She'll be outside the manor and alone. Perhaps you could waylay her on the way home or some such thing. I wanted to emphasize the difficulty in murdering someone properly, let alone making them disappear on such short notice. But I said only, I will certainly consider it as a potential opening. Regardless, rest assured that your wife will die before your return in 3 days. Excellent, Roland said, snuffing out his cigar as he came around the desk. There is only one more detail to discuss then. Oh, I asked. What's that? My wife is a smart woman, he said with a sour expression that told me how much it pained him to say anything nice about her. It's possible she may have suspicions about my intentions toward her. I couldn't imagine why. If Mr. Fairwind spoke half as badly to her directly as he did when she wasn't present, I'd be surprised if she didn't have more than just suspicions. Suspicions, Mr. Fairwind continued, which may have led her to take certain precautions. I waited for him to explain. Mara is not my first wife, Mr. Fairwind said. Strange occurrences befell the previous ones, and given the state of our marriage, it wouldn't take a genius to figure out what comes next for her. That's why it's so important you do this in such a way that no one ever connects the deed to me. Like I said, Mara is smart. Smarter than those others, for sure. She may have gathered certain information about myself and some of my business dealings such that, upon her death or disappearance, this information will find its way to an inspector's desk. Smart, indeed. I saw where Roland was going with this, so I said, "You want me to verify if she's taken such measures, and, if so, make sure it's destroyed before I end her life." "Exactly so," Roland said, beaming. "It seems you are as good as your reputation dictates, Mr. Tollwood." Praise aside, Mr. Fairwind was not making my job any easier, since now I needed to establish a relationship with his wife and earn her trust in order to find out about the incriminating information before I killed her. 3 days was hardly enough time to do this job properly, but again, I knew the Rolands of the world didn't like to hear excuses, so I kept my concerns to myself. Still, Mr. Fairwind must have seen the wheels turning in my mind, since he said, "If it's faster to beat it out of her, then by all means, do whatever you deem necessary." This man truly was a cad, with equal measures of barbarism when it came to wine and women, it seemed, so I should not have expected any less of a suggestion from him. Fortunately for his wife, such was not how I did business. I'll find a way. With that, there was little else to discuss other than my fee, which we did in short order before Mr. Fairwind excused himself, disappearing down a darkened hall while Grom escorted me back through the narrow passage and to the secret door I'd used to gain entry to the meeting room. Along the way, I asked about the one thing that still made little sense. Why does he hate her so much? Grom let the question float between us for so long, I wondered if he might not answer. But finally, he said, "Because Mrs. Fairwind does the one thing he cannot. She inspires others. You would have to see her paintings to understand. When you view them, it's as if you're present in the scene, experiencing the moment. I can't explain it any more than that. It is an emotional experience." I doubted if the drab steward had ever experienced such a thing, but I saw his lips almost turn into a grin as some memory caught his fancy, and I wondered if such a dour man could find it in him to smile. Then perhaps there was hope for the rest of us. "As much as he has tried," Grom said, the expression fading. "Mr. Fairwind cannot see what others do when they view her work. At first it frustrated him, but few had seen her paintings then, so he dismissed it as an idiosyncratic irrelevancy. But as word spread and more people came away delighted in ways they never thought possible, it angered him to no end that he, of all people, was excluded from this phenomenon. Far from capitalizing on his wife's growing success, the feeling of being left out has made him bitter and hateful toward her." We stopped at the secret door leading outside. While Grom fiddled at the opening mechanism, I contemplated what he'd said. Then, as the door slid open noiselessly, I asked one final question. "Does Mr. Fairwind have any heirs?" Grom shook his head. "None." I let the implication, which amounted to one more reason, hang in the air as I stepped out into the night. Before the door slid closed behind me, I said, "I'll send word when the job is done." Alone in the dark now, I slipped quietly through the Fairwind Manor's garden, over the wall, and onto the empty, lamplit street. I turned back toward the house only once, at which point I thought I saw someone, a woman, perhaps, by her silhouette, in a window. But then the light went out, and all returned to darkness. Then it was on to home for a good night's sleep before I planned Mrs. Fairwind's demise. The limited time I had to execute the contract dictated I take advantage of the earliest opportunity available. As Mr. Fairwind had indicated, That occasion was immediately after this evening's exhibit as the Mark made her way home. The act itself was simple enough, and despite my earlier misgivings, I had the whole thing planned in no time at all. Arrive dressed as a coachman, take out Mrs. Fairwind's driver, and then, with the Mark none the wiser, drive her somewhere secluded and private. Once the deed was done, I'd have to make her corpse disappear along with the driver's, since I wanted no one suspecting foul play. But I knew those logistics by rote at this point in my career. The plan was efficient and direct, and under normal circumstances that's the strategy I'd follow. But Grom had intrigued me with his talk about the paintings, and I knew I had to see them for myself. I could still execute my plan as intended afterward, but in the disguise of a gentleman rather than a driver. Arriving at the Red Tea Room, a quiet place of shadowed ambiance, I had to bribe the woman at the door to gain entry since I wasn't on the guest list. Fortunately, most people are receptive to a handful of dinars, especially from someone so handsome and well-dressed, so with the price of admission paid, I blended into the sparse gathering as if I belonged there. I possessed limited knowledge of art, and with no time to perform the usual research, I assumed a straightforward cover of ignorance as I explained myself to a matron who inquired about my interest in Mrs. Fairwind's work. "I must admit it's all new to me, Mrs. Rothschild," the woman said, peering down her nose at me, as if I should have already known that. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Rothschild. My name is Russell Tollwood, and, as I was saying, I am very new to collecting. But when I heard about Mrs. Fairwind's marvelous paintings, I knew I needed to see them. As happenstance has it, I'm spending some time in this part of the city for a few days. So when I learned of the exhibit, there seemed no better opportunity to see her work for myself." I'd lost the woman's interest after my first sentence, so she gave me a small smile and nodded before making some excuse about seeing someone on the room's other side she needed to catch up with. Stepping back, I gave her a slight bow, but she wasn't paying attention anymore. And so, as a waiter carrying a tray of brandy snifters passed by, I took one and strolled casually amongst the guests. I spotted a woman holding court and, assuming this was Mrs. Fairwind, headed in that direction. Along the way, I perused the paintings, surprised when I recognized the scenery of many. A vibrant street teeming with the colored activity of market, a turreted building majestically soaring above the row, and, the last, a decadent tower standing tall and inviting, its well-lit aerodocks receptive to all arriving airships, which were all places within Alcester, but conveyed with zest and spirit I'd never seen in such locations before. The market, which was the weekend bazaar held at Crescent Street and Moonshadow Lane, was a sordid affair, with hucksters, charlatans, and beggars at every corner, while the tradesmen who set up booths there sold days-old fruit, vegetables, and other confections left over from the principal markets elsewhere. The spired building was anything but majestic, since it had been abandoned centuries ago, and if anyone still lived there, it was only the lonely ghost of the sorcerer who built it. The birthing tower, which I easily recognized as one of Alchester's airship towers, was probably as close to accurate as any of them, but in actuality the airfields were scattered with abandoned and little-used docks and other structures, giving the place a haunted feel on the best of days. As for extraordinary sensations, I felt nothing when I looked at the paintings. Perhaps a sense of wonderment with what might have been had fate dealt these places a different hand, but nothing like what Grom had described. "You seem unsettled, sir," a feminine voice said next to me. "I hope you found nothing disagreeable with my paintings." I took in Mrs. Fairwind, who, up close, I saw was a lovely middle-aged woman with dark hair coiffed and elegant, to match the simple grace of her gown. She wore the lightest of makeup. Even in the dim light I could tell she hardly needed any more. Her eyes, which were a mesmerizing shade of blue, held mine, and I sensed more than saw an underlying sadness in them. "But if you have," she said, breaking from my stare to glance at the Arrow Tower painting, "it's perfectly all right. With art, everyone sees something different. Often, people see what they want to see." "Not unsettled, ma'am," I said, likewise returning my attention to the painting. "Only a little surprised." I waved my glass to take in the line of canvas on the wall. I know these places well, and they look very different in real life." Mara folded her hands before her, and she took a moment to gaze sidelong at me before returning her attention to the paintings. "Yes, but I try to look past the facade to really see a place for what it is. There is beauty in all things, wouldn't you agree, Mr.?" We exchanged names. "And what brings you to my exhibit, Mr. Tollwood? I mean, I know you're here to see my art, but what specifically drew you here?" I'd spent part of the day building out the persona of Russell Tollwood, how he was new to collecting but possessed a fervent zeal for it, fancying himself an amateur for sure, but still possessed of a keen eye and a willfulness to learn. Yes, he'd heard of the marvelous, almost supernatural aspect of Mrs. Fairwind's paintings, but his reason for coming was more than that. I planned to open a place of art, much like the Red Tea Room, to feature works from the city's best and brightest up-and-coming artists. And now that I'd seen Mrs. Fairwind's work firsthand, I knew I could feature no one other than her as my first artist. I designed the answer to form a connection between us via our mutual interest in the arts and to draw her in, earning her interest, and perhaps enough of her trust to make the real reason I was here all the easier. But though I had my practiced answer on my lips, I found myself saying something altogether different. "I'm here because of your husband," I said in plain terms. "Excuse me?" she asked, withdrawing slightly as if I'd just told her I was diseased. "I met with Mr. Fairwind yesterday to close a business deal. We spoke about many things, of course, but the subject of your paintings came up as well. He mentioned this showing, and given what I'd already heard, I knew I needed to attend to see your work for myself." Mrs. Fairwind suddenly had trouble looking in my direction. "I'm surprised he didn't warn you away," she said in a small voice. "My husband does not appreciate my art the way some others do. He rarely has anything good to say about it." I paused, studying her before saying, "Now it's my turn to say I did not mean to unsettle you." She threw me a quick smile. "Not unsettled, Mr. Tollwood, but my husband and I are—" She stopped, struggling for the words to convey their rocky relationship. "How do you describe an association with a husband who hates you to someone you just met?" Since I already knew the story, I spared her the need, deftly changing the subject. "I do wonder about one thing, Mrs. Fairwind." She looked at me expectantly. "People say viewing your paintings instills an almost magical feeling in them, if you will. Admittedly, I only glanced briefly at the ones before us, and while I will admit I find them impressive, I have felt nothing magical." "People do say that, don't they?" she asked. "Honestly, I have wondered about this too. I mean, I like to think my work instills something in people, but a magical feeling—" She let out a short laugh, granting me a smile I felt compelled to reciprocate. For just a moment, the sadness fled from her eyes, replaced by joy, mirth, and, I dare say, a small measure of the simple love for life. "I'm just thankful someone came tonight." I took in the gathering with a glance. Though small, the number of people in attendance was not insubstantial. "You've nothing to fear in that regard. Now, Mrs. Fairwind, I have monopolized far too much of your time." I bowed and withdrew, carrying the vision of the woman's smile with me as I made my way around the parlor and, intent on moving to the next step in my plan, to the closest exit. Outside, I ducked into an alley where I expected I'd find Mrs. Fairwind's driver half asleep, waiting by her carriage, when instead, I found myself accosted by 3 gentlemen who emerged from the shadows to bar my passage. Instinctively, my hand went to one of the knives concealed on my person, but when none of them made any further move toward me, I relaxed and settled on my heels to see what they wanted. "Something I can do for you, gentlemen?" I asked. The man in the center stepped forward while the other 2 hung back. This one was dressed exquisitely in a long gray coat, a somber vest, and a patterned cravat that concealed a long neck. His thin beard, mustache, and even his brows were trimmed to immaculate perfection. He finished his ensemble off with a decorative cane that he twirled in the air as he stepped forward. "I understand you've an interest in Mara Fairwind," he said, piercing dark eyes taking me in and dismissing me with a glance. "I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, wondering who had warned him about me. My statement elicited an annoyed expression. I'm sure you do. The name Russell Tollwood was not on the guest list. Furthermore, there is no Mr. Tollwood in the arts community. I would know if there was. So, who are you, and what do you want with Mrs. Fairwind? Interesting and more interesting, I thought, that this person had the connections to figure out my presence here was a sham. And quickly, too. But not my true purpose. I used that to my advantage. I'm likely here for the same reason you are, Mr. Would you care to grace me with your name? Blackwell, he said, crossing his arms. Jarek Blackwell. He made no effort to introduce the other two, and I didn't ask, figuring Blackwell was the brains and the other two, who were dressed much more plainly, the muscle. I very much doubt you and I are here for the same purpose, Mr. Tollwood, Jarek said. But I recognized the type of man you are the moment I saw you inside. Oh? I asked. What kind is that? A hunter like me. For that reason, I am willing to extend you a one-time courtesy. Back off. Mara Fairwind is mine. Attempt to interfere, and you shall not find me so generous or cordial. A hunter? The man looked like nothing of the sort with his fine clothes, top hat, and thin mustache and beard, so I asked, What sort of hunter are you, Mr. Blackwell? I'm surprised you need to ask, he said, scoffing at my ignorance. You must know of Mrs. Fairwind's extraordinary abilities. Her paintings caught my interest some weeks ago. Somehow she is imbuing her art with a special kind of magic. Surely you experienced the painting's strange properties while inside. No? Oh well, not everyone can. I'll admit, I couldn't either. Not that it matters. One's feelings should never distract us from the business at hand, am I right? The Sorcerer's League pays well for magically charged life force energy, so I'm here to collect hers. I'd heard of the Sorcerer's League, a loose alliance of wizards who came together when their mood, or the need, suited them. Their intentions neither benevolent nor nefarious, but somewhere in between. It did not surprise me to learn they delved into the black market, which served all manner of perverse and wicked cravings. Drugs, slavery, and apparently a person's life force energy were all available for the right price. Those such as Blackwell were not the driving force behind such depravities. Rather, they fulfilled the need. I had no moral high ground to stand on, so I didn't fault him for his choice of profession. But something about his smug expression didn't sit well with me. So, I said, smirking, you're more a collector than a hunter. Hunters and harvesters being two different things, he bristled at the perceived insult, but said nothing. Tell me, Mr. Blackwell, what happens to the lady once you've collected her life force? I genuinely didn't know. Why, she dies, of course. And if she somehow expires before you get to her? I asked, crossing my arms. The implication of my question dawned on him after a few seconds. You're here to kill Mrs. Fairwind, he said. Interesting. In what way? Because I wonder if we might be able to help one another. I waited for a further explanation. I only need Mrs. Fairwind's life energy, Jarek said. I have no need for her corpse. So, everyone gets what they want? I asked. Precisely, Mr. Blackwell said. Except Mrs. Fairwind. But that's neither here nor there. She's been marked for death at least twice over, so her time in this world is clearly at an end. Best someone takes some profit from it, eh? Someone should, I said, but it won't be you, Mr. Blackwell. Next to him, Jarek's associates finally showed some signs of life, shuffling from one foot to another, but otherwise staying in place as if waiting for their master to unleash them. Jarek's stare held my own for a few long seconds before he grinned. So be it, Mr. Tollwood, he said. I meant what I said earlier. Stay out of my way or suffer the consequences. With that, he tapped his cane once on the ground, spun around on his polished shoes, and strode away into the dark, but not before I glimpsed a coil-barreled weapon of some sort beneath his coat. His lackeys followed him, leaving me alone to contemplate my next move. When I'd entered the alleyway, I was intent on replacing Mrs. Fairwind's driver per my initial plan and then getting on with the rest. But Mr. Blackwell's intercedence introduced a new element. His proposal was fair in that we both got what we wanted, but I'd heard stories about the work people like Blackwell did. Tales that told of a person's energy, their soul, some believed, living on even after the act of harvesting. Disembodied, trapped, and then what? Used up by some wizard of the Sorcerer's League? Or did the energy live on even still in the form of whatever horror a sorcerer thought up? Too many questions, and I knew I'd find no answers alone in an alleyway. Mrs. Fairwind's carriage was tucked away in a corner a short distance ahead, but I turned away from it. Mara Fairwind was still going to die, but her death would be a clean one with the finality that only my killing knife could deliver, not the eternal damnation Jarek Blackwell planned for her. For now, Mrs. Fairwind was safe inside the gallery, but men were coming for her soon. I meant to stop them by killing her first. While Mrs. Fairwind entertained her guests inside the red tea room, I paid a visit to a residence of mine not far from the gallery to change from the clothes of a gentleman into those of an assassin. Dark studded leather over a padded gambeson with whisper-quiet boots, and a mask that revealed nothing but the slit of my eyes. Besides the smaller knives I kept hidden in secret folds and pockets, I had my long knives at my belt and my assassin's bow over a shoulder. Jarek Blackwell didn't strike me as a wizard himself, but that didn't mean he didn't employ some of their tactics, and while my weapons were mainly of the conventional variety, I had a few tricks up my sleeve for dealing with sorcerers or their ilk. I knew that, above all other things, I needed to stay clear of his extraction device, which could suck the life from me as easily as anyone else. The thought of spending an eternity as the plaything for some mad sorcerer was troubling at best. Back outside the gallery, I went to the rooftops, waiting for Mrs. Fairwind to emerge while watching for Jarek and his thugs. They'd wait for the lady's carriage to leave the vicinity, rather than risk someone seeing them performing their diablerie, which meant my moment to strike was soon after the carriage got underway. I only spied the one driver earlier, and from what I'd seen of him I didn't expect any trouble. Since dead men tell no tales, he'd have to disappear as well, to keep up the appearance that Mrs. Fairwind fled the city while her husband was away. Pity for him, but sometimes all it takes is being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The event came to a close as people spilled onto the street. Carriages clopped forward, whisking the assembled gentlemen and ladies to their next destination or home, while Mrs. Fairwind's carriage chose a spot on a corner to wait for her since she made sure to see each guest off. While she occupied herself with that, I noticed the gallery's proprietor loading a handful of the ladies' paintings into the wagon. I suppose these were select pieces with special meaning, and someone would deliver the rest to her home the next day. Finally, with only the gallery's proprietor remaining, Mrs. Fairwind's driver helped her into her carriage, and off they went. I followed, silent and unseen, leaping from rooftop to rooftop as I kept pace with their relatively slow progress. If the driver followed the fastest route home, then I only needed to wait for the transport to leave the sleepy arts district and make its way into Grangertown, which was busy at all hours with its taverns, markets, and street performances. So I ran ahead, taking a shortcut, and waited with an arrow ready for the carriage to appear from around the corner. I counted the seconds, waiting, then wondering what had happened because the carriage was nowhere in sight. "Hell and damnation," I whispered, because I knew I had underestimated Jarek Blackwell. Backtracking, I saw no sign of the carriage at first, but only so many avenues led away from the main road, and since I had a view from my perch of all the intersecting byways, I soon located the transport meandering along at a regular pace but heading opposite the Fairwind estate. There seemed nothing untoward other than its change of heading, so, still on the rooftops, I caught up and gained line of sight on the driver. I expected to see one of Blackwell's thugs holding the reins. Instead, I saw the Fairwind's regular man, who didn't look suspicious at all as he cast nervous glances behind him, as if to see if his charge had figured out he'd hoodwinked her and was leading her to her death. The carriage traversed a dark, empty lane. With no idea where the driver meant to stop for Blackwell to do his dirty work, I withdrew an arrow from my quiver, aimed for the driver, and loosed. Just like that, the man fell over in his seat, dead. I hooked a grapple onto the roof's ledge and, using my cloak to slow my descent, jumped from the edge to swoop down onto the street. The dray pulling the carriage, no doubt picking up the scent of blood now, let out a huff, the regular clop of its hooves missing a beat as the horse threw its head from side to side. Or maybe nervousness clung to it because it sensed Blackwell's thugs, who stepped from the shadows with clubs ready. One approached the dray directly, holding up his hands for the animal to stop. I hoped his arrival might spook the horse enough for it to run him down, but no such luck. The horse stopped. Inside, a muffled voice asked what was happening. No time to answer as the second bruiser slapped his club into his open palm as he approached me. He sneered, but his gaze looking past me betrayed him. Without thinking, I leaped and rolled to one side, the sizzle of amber energy the only alert I had to Blackwell's presence. "You were warned!" Jarek yelled as another amber flash momentarily blinded me. Again, the sizzle of energy was close, but I'd kept rolling, so I somehow avoided the attack. Then, both bruisers were on me, swinging with deadly intent. The first swing missed, but the second glanced from my arm. My armor took most of the blow, but the sting kept me from drawing my second long knife. I backed away, avoiding one swing and then another, not striking yet because the bruisers kept pressing forward, alternating their attacks. So I had no choice but to remain on the defensive. But those few moments allowed me to study their movements, observe the flaws in their assault, and formulate a plan to kill them. They were only the hired help, but I didn't like ambushes, especially when I was the one on the receiving end, so I offered no mercy as I slashed the arm of one as a distraction, then dove in low and cut into the other's belly. The first only winced in pain, but the second cried out, singing the sweet song of agony as he dropped to his knees. I kicked him in the face, cutting off his soprano as I deflected the angry swing of the other. This fight wasn't fair for the pair of bruisers from the start. Now, with only one still standing, it was less so, but before I could finish him, I heard Mrs. Fairwind cry out in protest. That answered my question about where Jarek had gotten to, and while I wanted to help her, my lone opponent had other ideas as he swung for my head. Tired of this contest, I turned the thug's weapon away with one long knife, then drew my other and, in the same motion, opened the man's throat. The spray of blood and the gurgling as he fell to his knees were both expected, as was the light soon fading from his eyes. I didn't stick around to watch him expire as I ran to confront Blackwell. On the other side of the wagon, I found he'd pulled Mrs. Fairwind from the carriage and thrown her to the ground. He had one knee pressed to her breast to keep her stationary, while he pointed the coil-barreled device I saw earlier directly at her face. The weapon had a short handle and a trigger, and the coils glowed with a feral azure light. On top of the device was a glass cylinder, empty for now, but no doubt meant to hold a person's life force energy. Glancing up, Jarek pointed his cane at me and smirked. "You should have taken the deal," he said, squeezing the trigger. I don't think Jarek even saw the throwing star I hurled at him, but I know he felt it as the weapon embedded itself into the back of his hand. Unused to the pain he delved out to others, he cried out, his device going askew at the moment of activation. Visible waves of pulsating light extending and refracting exploded from the coils, but robbed of its target, nothing else happened. Not wanting to let Mr. Blackwell have another shot at the lady, I barreled into him, knocking him from her. Jarek lost his grip on his extractor, but not his cane as we tumbled across the street, fists, elbows, and knees connecting until we separated and each regained our feet. I readied my long knives, but Blackwell had other ideas as he leveled his walking stick at me. The end of the device, which glowed with an amber light, grew in intensity until, even knowing what came next, I was too close to avoid it. I tried to dodge anyway, the amber streak of energy hitting me with enough force to slam me into the carriage. Dazed from the impact, I fell to the ground, right in the way of the wheels, which would not have been a problem if the dray hadn't chosen that moment to bolt as the sizzle of energy spooked it. Neighing in alarm, the animal started clomping off into the night. Right before the carriage ran me over, someone grabbed me, pulling me away just in time. My savior, who was none other than Mrs. Fairwind, helped me to my feet. Whatever sort of weapon Blackwell's cane was, it packed a wallop as I struggled to remain upright. I had to, though, because the collector pointed his cane at me once more. He didn't waste time with words this time, shooting a blast of energy meant to finish me. But Mrs. Fairwind stepped between us, and before I could wonder what the hell she was doing, She leveled the collector's life force extraction device at the oncoming stream of amber energy and pressed the trigger. Like before, shimmering waves erupted from the extractor, but this time, when met with the crackling energy from the cane, the waves absorbed the oncoming energy. More than that, they funneled power into the device's coils, which lit up ever brighter now. The empty cylinder at the top of the device wasn't empty for much longer, as an amber glow began to fill it. "What are you doing?" Jarek screamed, trying to change the direction of his cane to either redirect or stop the flow of energy, but with little success, as the amber glow continued flowing toward the extractor. I wasn't sure about the outcome of such a contest, but Jarek's outburst and alarmed expression told me we weren't heading for anything good. Briefly, I wondered at Mrs. Fairwind's resolve, but her bared teeth and narrowed brow told me she had no intentions of stopping or backing down until one of them was dead. Jarek had already tried to kill her, so she knew the stakes better than anyone. With energy continuing to pour from the cane, I was wondering if any of us would survive this when something finally gave on both ends of the contest. The extractor's vial, filled to bursting now, exploded simultaneously with Jarek's cane. The blast hammered into all three of us, though I supposed Mara and Jarek got the worst of it. Or at least Jarek did, because just as the extractor's container bulged, and I knew the vessel could take no more. I dove into Mara, knocking the extractor from her grasp, precisely before it exploded in a flash of brilliance. The resulting shockwave still took us both to the ground. I didn't know how long we lay there, but Mara eased herself to her knees first, and finally stood on wobbly legs. Doing the same, I watched her stumble toward Blackwell, who lay on his back with smoke wafting from his body. His chest's slow rise and fall told me he was still alive, but he showed no signs of getting up any time soon. Mrs. Fairwind turned away from her unconscious adversary to look at me. Her coiffed hair was a mess, her eyeshadow smeared, her rouge wiped away. But her stare penetrated me, and I saw the wheels turning in her mind, wondering if I deserved the same fate as Mr. Blackwell. I doubt my assassin's garb helped her decide, so I lowered my mask, whereupon she recognized me instantly. "Mr. Tollwood," she said, her shoulders suddenly sagging and tears coming to her eyes. She let out a near-silent sob. I wasn't sure why until she said, "My husband sent you too, didn't he?" "Only me," I said. "Jarek Blackwell had no connection to Mr. Fairwind, as far as I know. He was after your magic." She shook her head. "Magic? There's no magic. I just paint." I couldn't offer any more explanation than what I'd already said, so I said nothing else. She wrapped her arms tight around her breast and sighed heavily. "Just do it already. I can't fight anymore. Every day? I try, but he's too much. I didn't know about his other wives until long after. But even when I did, I thought this time would be different. But he's jealous of everything. Even the smallest success that isn't his own turns him bitter and violent. I'm sick of it, so do it already." Something snapped, and she teetered, threatening to collapse, so I shook off my own malaise and swooped in to take hold of her. Lifting her from her feet, I carried her away from Jarek Blackwell and his diabolical plan to steal her soul to her carriage, which I found a few blocks away. The dray was old and tired, and with no one to lead him, he'd simply stopped. Gently, I put Mrs. Fairwind inside the carriage, then shoved the dead driver aside and guided the dray across the city to the shambles. I knew a place, down a lampless street and an alley bathed in even deeper darkness, through a hidden gateway, and into an odd space between buildings where no one would find us or ever think to search for the lady. Stopping the carriage, I closed the gate behind us, then went to see if Mrs. Fairwind was awake. She opened the carriage door before I got there and stepped out. She took one look at her surroundings, and if she had any hope at all before, sobbed again as she realized she had no hope at all now. I walked up to her, lifting her trembling chin when she wouldn't look at me. This was a good place to kill someone. A quick jab, and it was done. Disposing of a corpse in a city like Alchester was a simple matter, even simpler for someone as experienced as myself. Mara Fairwind didn't deserve to die, but then most people didn't. But the right or wrong of it wasn't for me to decide. Most of the time. Sometimes even for me. Death isn't the answer. I had my contract to consider. Reneging on a deal was never a good idea, but my client had given me great latitude in interpreting the conditions. I planned to take full advantage of that fact. "You saved my life tonight," I said. Teary blue eyes stared deep into mine. "Does that mean something to you?" "It does." "I was only trying to save myself," she said. I shrugged. "It doesn't matter. Maybe you acted by instinct. Or maybe you saw how me and Jarek were at odds and thought your chances of survival were greater with me alive. Regardless, I owe you a debt. Besides, I want to help you." When had I changed my mind? Even now, I couldn't point to any one thing. Rather, it was a culmination of events. I meant what I said about Mara saving my life. It meant something. But enough to spare her? Not by itself, but I remember the looks of sheer delight on the people's faces who viewed her work in the gallery. And if Mara's unique talent could make a man even as dull and lifeless as Grom smile, maybe fate had something greater in mind for her than a quick death and a rapid fade into obscurity. Maybe, when you got right down to it, I wanted to help her just to spite the Roland Fairwinds of the world. Or perhaps I did it for another reason entirely. She hesitated but finally said, "Why?" "Because I know what having no one on your side is like, to feel like you're trapped. Most of my clients want rivals killed, people who are as bad as they are and just as powerful, not—" "Defenseless women?" Mara asked. I affected a thin smile. "The way you handled yourself back there? You're anything but defenseless." She returned the gesture, then asked, "How do you intend to help me, Mr. Tollwood, or whatever your name really is?" "Roland hired me to make you disappear, so that's what I'm going to do. Make you disappear. No one knows you're here. Your driver is dead. Mr. Blackwell paid him to lead you into that ambush, so I hope no hard feelings about that. But disappearing means you need to leave the city. Tonight. Now you can't risk returning home, so you'll have to leave with only the things you have with you, which I know is very little. But I can arrange for clothes and other necessities once you've made it as far as Rilia." "Why would you help me?" Mara asked. "You were supposed to kill me." "Like I said, I owe you." Her eyes searched mine, looking for some other answer. I didn't know if she found one, but she said, "I told you earlier this evening that I could see beyond the facade of a place to see its true nature. Is that magic? I never thought of it in those terms. But sometimes I look at people and see past their facade, too. It's like peering into someone's soul, I suppose. I looked at that other man during the altercation and saw only darkness. When I look at you, I see—" "It doesn't matter what you see, Mrs. Fairwind." It didn't matter either. My only concern was getting her out of the city and collecting my fee from her husband. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I knew the kind of person I was, and it especially wasn't lost on me that of all the people who experienced nothing while viewing her paintings, Roland Fairwind, Jarek Blackwell, and myself were among them. So whatever Mrs. Fairwind thought she saw didn't matter because she was mistaken. I murder for profit, which is all one really needs to know about me. "One more thing before I forget," I said. "Your husband was concerned you had a contingency in place if something happened to you. A plan to discredit or implicate him in any foul play befalling you. Did you make any such arrangements?" Mara softly shook her head. "Roland would think that because it's exactly what he would do were our roles reversed. I made no such plans. In hindsight, however, I wish I had." With that confirmed, I told her to wait here while I arranged for her safe and secret passage from Alchester. I knew someone who smuggled goods in and out of the city often enough. I doubt she'd mind smuggling a person if the price was right. Since it needed to happen tonight, I left Mara alone while I made arrangements to have her taken to Rilia and beyond, returning as soon as possible. Whereupon, I led Mara to the rendezvous point elsewhere in the city. We exchanged curt farewells, and I reminded her that if she ever returned to Alchester or her husband somehow learned she was still alive, she was likely a dead woman. She nodded, understanding full well the seriousness of my warning. Then she was gone, and I hoped, for her sake, that we never saw each other again. Upon his return, Roland Fairwind was ecstatic to learn of his wife's demise. As proof, I offered him her bloody wedding ring, which had become stained from a cut the lady had suffered during the altercation. I collected my payment, and that was that. Grom glanced at me with some distaste as he led me out, as if he disapproved of the outcome even though he'd been a party to it. I ignored his self-righteousness, or whatever it was, and then I left the Fairwind Manor behind to see to the one remaining task: disposing of the lady's carriage. I'd already dealt with the driver's corpse, which no one would ever find. But the transport was an equally delicate matter. All of Fairwind's coaches were decorated with their own distinctive style, so I couldn't risk driving the vehicle outside the city for fear someone might recognize it along the way. So, out of an abundance of caution, I tasked a team of workers who I knew would keep their mouths shut and who had no knowledge of the previous night's escapades to come to my secret alcove to disassemble the carriage piece by piece. Maybe I was paranoid about the whole thing, but paranoia had kept me alive this long, so I saw no reason to change that policy. As for the paintings Mrs. Fairwind had stashed inside the coach, I disposed of those too, since no clue must remain. Before I destroyed them, however, I couldn't help but scan a small sample. Like before, I felt nothing special when I studied the first few, though these differed from the ones I saw in the gallery. They were not places but people in everyday life going about their daily business. A merchant and a prospective buyer haggling at a booth, a matron shopping at market, a family sitting down at a table on a veranda overlooking the city. That last one caught my eye, and as I gazed past the father and mother to their teenage son and daughter, who was older still, something long forgotten stirred within me. My skin tingled as, impossibly, a cool breeze blew across my face, even though the air in the alcove had been still moments before. I smelled a woman's soft fragrance, my mother's, and laughter, deep and full of life, from my father as well as a giggle from the girl, my sister in this strange vision, if one were to call it that was too innocent and so unlike the Olivia I knew today. Was this the magic everyone whispered about? Perhaps, but to what purpose? At the first stirrings I had thought a memory returned to me, but now I realized the boy and girl were too old, the scene itself something that had never happened. Not a memory at all, then, but something else, a possibility, a future that might have been had fate dealt a different hand the night my parents had been murdered and me and Olivia had been forced to run for our lives. People see what they want to see, Mara had said, but she was wrong. This was something I never wanted to see. I had a life once, and a name, but I left those behind long ago. I never dwelt on other possibilities or other possible futures. Never have regrets was a rule so fundamental to our profession that the words were part of our code. It mainly applied to committing murder, but the code was a loose one, its tenets expansive in their meaning. Yet, as I continued to study the painting, I couldn't escape the strange, lifelike sensations and deep emotions until, frustrated, I tossed the canvas into a bin with the rest. Though I watched while fire consumed every bit of those paintings, the feeling of sadness, regret, and, worst of all, longing remained. You've reached the end of this adventure. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel to get a notification when each new story is available. You can view all my books and get the latest news by visiting scottmarlowe.com.